Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on Saturday, September 21st, 2019, for our Bible study. We are recording today from the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent, Plainfield, New Jersey, the United States of America, and we welcome you all. And today, Betty is our moderator from California.
Okay, I'll start with the quote. Alternately transported and alarmed by abstruse problems of Scripture, we are liable to turn from them as impractical or beyond the ken of mortals and past finding out. Our thoughts of the Bible utter our lives. As silent night foretells the dawn and din of morn, as the dullness of today prophesies renewed energy for tomorrow, so the pagan philosophies and tribal religions of yesterday but foreshadowed the spiritual dawn of the 20th century, religion parting with its materiality. Christian Science stills all distress over doubtful interpretations of the Bible. It lights the fires of the Holy Ghost and floods the world with the baptism of Jesus. It is this ethereal flame, this almost unconceived light of divine love, that heaven husbands in the first commandment. And that's from Message for 1902 by Mary Baker Eddy, page 4, lines 28 through 11.
Thank you.
Yeah, very beautiful and true. It is true, our thoughts of the Bible utter our lives. Proven time and time again. That's why it's so important to have a good understanding of it.
And appreciation for it.
Especially the Sermon on the Mount and the Ten Commandments. It shapes character, right, Florence?
Yes, it does.
That was what many of the great leaders have said, that their mothers taught them the Bible. As a child, certainly Abraham Lincoln, I say mothers, maybe fathers, but someone taught them the Bible. And it did shape their life.
I like the.
Go ahead. No,
I like the quote where it says that Christian Science tells all distress over doubtful interpretation of the Bible. And it's sure, people are saying different things, their own interpretations of what the Bible, even the stories say. So I feel Mrs. Eddy is so right. I think the Bible and Christian Science and Health really does bring a special explanation that makes living the truth practical.
Thank you. Yes. Key to the Scriptures.
And it's, I think it's remarkable to me sometimes how the timing of all of this, Mrs. Eddy's revelation, the beginning of Christian Science, comes at a time when a lot of things, including religion, are beginning to part with their materiality. I think of Albert Einstein and what he did for physics. It brought physics into a whole different realm, parting with the materiality that had dominated physics for centuries. And now nuclear physicists realize that physics is more metaphysics than physics. And it's gravitating in that direction. But we live at a exciting time in the history of mankind, where we've been given something really tremendous.
Thank you. Yes, and some of these religions that are all old theology, people are breaking away from that and realizing that it's wrong. It doesn't meet the needs of mankind. It has no true value to it, and that's a good thing. That is always a good thing. But we have to be standing in the shadows, ready to give what is needed with Mrs. Eddy's science, Christ, Christianity. And our church is. Anyone else?
This reminds me of a series I was watching yesterday, and in this series there was this priest who was completely distressed about something that had happened to his daughter, and his reaction holding the Bible in his hand. And I just thought while I was watching that, it was only a series, but it illustrates, in my opinion, contemporary thinking about religion or Christianity in general. And I was just thinking, gee, if you just had Christian Science, you would totally see that you are so wrong in your interpretation of what you're quoting from the Bible. It was so obvious to me, and I just said, thank you, God, for Christian Science and for bringing me to the Bible so that I can learn from the Bible.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right. The topic is, there is none so blind as those that will not see. And the Bible readings were from John 9. And we'll start with the first question. Why do you think the disciples questioned Jesus about the blind man? That would have been John 9, verses 1 to 2.
And I would just like to mention, too, what had just happened to Jesus before this?
They were stoned. Yeah.
Go ahead.
He was stoned. He was being stoned, so he was really running for his life.
That's right.
And but he stopped in the midst of all that. He stopped to help this blind man, which was really, even this blind man helping him was more important than his own life.
Yes, thank you. That's right. It's quite wonderful to realize that. And sorry, I'm getting a call from Norway. Anyway, yeah, and Spurgeon says about that Jesus was often reviled, but never ruffled. One of the things worthy to be noticed in our Lord's character is his wonderful quiet of spirit, especially his marvelous calmness in the presence of those who misjudged and insulted and slandered him. This is why it's so important not to react to things, because while you're reacting and all upset, perhaps there's someone who's going to need your quietness, need your Christ. That was certainly something Mrs. Evans taught practitioners, that you just couldn't afford to be having some little hissy fit or some little thing going on, because you never knew when the phone would ring and you had to meet the need. And so can all work to do that better. Here he was, being stoned, and yet he was so aware of everything and saw this man's need and was ready to meet it. So don't ever react or get all out of joint. That's why those readings were so good on Wednesday. Taking Offense by Mrs. Eddy. Who's speaking? Someone wanted to say something?
Well, it wasn't me, but what I wanted to say was it also showed where the disciples were at, that they were concerned about that kind of a thing when their lives were, well, his life was in danger.
Yes, thank you. We can move on to that. Yeah, right. Talk about insensitive.
So why did they question him?
We're trying to find out who has sinned. Is it the man or his relatives? Because that was the belief at that time. Also, that sickness means that somebody has sinned, is being punished for it, or they have demons. Such thinking. So maybe they were curious.
Yeah, that was a very common accepted belief at the time. I mean, it was a common, it was like a medical law. Someone's sick, well, somebody sinned.
And even the Pharisees said it to him later, thou wast altogether born in sins.
First.
It's the nature of the human mind to want to have somebody to find fault with, to point the finger at and blame. And, the human mind doesn't come up with anything new. It's true today. People seem to be more comfortable when they've got somebody else that they can point the finger at and say, yeah, because of you.
You certainly see it within Christian Scientists, don't you? Oh, look at that person. They must have done something. I was reading. It's different. If you're having a problem, it is a good thing to examine your thought, isn't it? As a Christian Scientist, it is. Yes. It's very important. And if you've been in science a long time, even more so, and a practitioner would need to root out its mental anatomy if you're indulging in the carnal mind. But to go around and judge people and just think, oh, well, they've got a problem, they must have done some horrible thing, that is not Christian Science. What did you read recently, Florence, about not criticizing and?
Oh, that's Mrs. Eddy and the treatment for every day. Is that the one? When she said when she ceased to criticize, judge, or condemn, she made progress. So.
There you are.
Mm-hmm.
There you are. So these are separate situations. You can examine your own thought. You have to use the mental anatomy to figure out if you've been hating or willful or some other thing going on. But to go around and judge other people, that's not science.
May I add? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Matthew Henry said, we are apt to be more inquisitive concerning other people's sins than concerning our own, whereas it is more our concern to know wherefore God contends with us than wherefore he contends with others for to judge.
Yeah. We've got
I guess mind your own business, really.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When it comes to that, yes.
Which was another of Mrs. Eddy's instructions to us all.
The beam in our own eye.
Well, also this, the disciples asking this question. But behind asking this kind of a question was the belief that they thought that this man's blindness was real, normal. They accepted it.
Thank you. That's very good.
When I read these two lines, I just immediately thought, well, they did not see him the way Jesus was seeing him. They did not see him spiritually. They were only seeing the physical, the material. Well, erroneous evidence basically presented to them by the physical senses. And ultimately, that means to me that they were believing the lie of a power or a mind apart from God. So while Jesus already knew that and saw the perfect man, God's idea.
Most definitely. That's how it could heal it. And I read, the disciples regarded this man as an unsolved riddle. They showed no interest in helping the man, but in discussing the cause for his condition. And think how callous that is. And as Gary and Candy just said, yeah, seeing him wrongly, and not as a child of God, but as a sinner, as a sick sinner, a blind sinner. And then Spurgeon says, it is ours not to speculate, but to perform acts of mercy and love according to the tenor of the gospel. Let us then be less inquisitive and more practical, less for cracking doctrinal nuts, and more for bringing forth the bread of life to the starving multitude. If you have your computer on, please turn it off. It creates an echo.
Or if you're using speakerphone and it's loud, sometimes it comes back.
And someone said in the very beginning here, I mean, yeah, the disciples were probably with Jesus. He'd been stoned. They were very insensitive to what was going around them. But Jesus never was ruffled or upset by all of this. Think of it. He just was about loving and healing and seeing the perfect man.
I think it was Henry Drummond said that Jesus basically went around being kind to everyone. So,
well,
yeah.
He knew what his mission was, and he wasn't letting anything distract him.
Yeah, and he was so certain of God with us. I mean, not a bit shaken with that. So certain of it.
Yeah, and as Mrs. Eddy says, he was the most scientific man who ever trod the globe. He knew the truth so much better than anybody else. He saw through all this stuff.
Unfortunately, what I realized was that I would have seen him exactly how the disciples did. And unfortunately, it's a lesson that we learn through society, but that doesn't excuse to continue it once I know better.
Well, and that's a good admission. And when you can admit and see what you're doing, then you can change it. If there's none so blind as that can. Anyway, if you can't see what you're doing wrong, you can't correct it. You're just stuck in it. Stuck in stupid, as Elsie likes to say.
And how?
Well, and that's why we're so grateful to Mrs. Eddy for explaining what this stuff is all about. You're right, Mike. We all look at things incorrectly some of the time, sometimes most of the time. But, thank God we have this, explanation of the science that leads us out of this ignorance, if we will see.
I'm grateful they asked the question because we got a good answer from it. So
yeah, it was a good teaching. So remember this. As Mike says, we can change. We don't have to be that way. And this is what all these times together are about.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I know when I was teaching Sunday school way back when, a question was asked by one of my students, well, if the parents weren't sinned, and he didn't sin, then he was born so that Jesus could come and heal him. And I can't remember how I answered that at the time. I don't even know that I gave a... But that was the question that came up. So he was born blind so Jesus could heal him one day. And
well, the explanation sort of given in this, the healing is for the glory of God. So what is the question? I mean, sometimes people get stuck on all this intellectual.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, and also let's keep in mind there is no explanation for error.
There isn't.
Yes. Yeah.
A mistake doesn't have an explanation. This was just another mortal mistake. This was general human belief that, people aren't born perfect. And his imperfection happened to be blindness. Other people, appear to have other imperfections. So there's no explanation.
And it goes back to thinking that man is creator and not understanding that God creates everything perfect.
And the perfection never changes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it is looking for answers in matter, and there are never any answers in matter. There just aren't. And it's making a reality of the problem, because if they could give an answer to that, then that makes it all the more real, doesn't it? Oh, well, there's a reason because of this, that, or the next thing. It makes the whole situation real, and we as scientists are seeing its unreality. It is like asking, well, where did 2 + 2 = 5 come from? Where did that come from?
Why did somebody make that mistake?
Yeah, why?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. If it could be explained, it would be something.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So that's a good point. And children are naturally inquisitive and need to be answered correctly in these things in Sunday school.
Yeah.
And then
Thank you.
To the next question, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Number 2, how did Jesus respond?
I was thinking the question that was just asked, it ties in with verse number 3, which is part of this question. And the way I saw it was that Jesus answered, neither hath this man sinned nor his parents, and then but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. And to me, from a metaphysical perspective, he was basically saying 2 things to them. First, that the effect cannot cause anything, meaning that there is nothing in the manifestation, in the effect, that can cause anything. Only God can cause something. And then at the same time, he was saying that this man was created perfect, so he already is perfect. And that's how Jesus saw him. So the attributes of God are already manifested in him, but it is our false vision, our false personal sense that prevents us from seeing that. So it is basically for us to work on developing our spiritual sense so that we can see rightly. That's sort of how I understood his answer in verse number 3.
Thank you.
No, that's good. Good.
And it's interesting because we notice how so much of this comes back to this idea of seeing. And when we learn these lessons better, our sight, our vision, which is God-given, becomes stronger, clearer, because it's mental. It's mental conception rather than a physical thing that can age or get bad in some way. So anyway, thank you very much. That was Candy, right? Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, Jesus was basically saying, no, what you see has no cause. Mm-hmm. And, he was basically saying, no, it's not real. You're seeing it incorrectly.
And it's interesting in that the other 2 verses, I must work the work of him that sent me while it is day. The night cometh when no man can work. What does that mean?
Well, I took that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Just do it now. The light.
You know, and
what is he talking about? The day, the light,
the light of understanding.
the Christ. He's talking about the presence of the Christ. He said the Christ is here.
And it's interesting. He says, I must. He doesn't say, maybe I should, or it would be nice if I would. He says, I must. Do we all have that in us, that we must do this work? And that he was sent. Remember the article we have on the website by Parthens talking about being sent. God is using us, sending us to various places. That song that I love, Bruce, what's the name of it? I hear you.
Lord, is it me, Lord?
Is it me, Lord? I hear you calling in the night. You know, this idea of receptivity to God's calling us, to sending us to places. And, you know, you can go to a place, and if your thought is open and receptive, there is healing work to be done everywhere we go. People are in need. And if you are aware, you will see it just as Jesus did and meet that need. All these stories we need to bring home. It's not about something that happened a long time ago. And then he had to work that work in the day. You know, we have this time to do this work. There are a lot of other things. Sometimes I was talking to Gary about other things. Gee, wouldn't it be nice to do this, that, or the next thing? But I can't, because there's this urging to do this while the day is light, while we have the opportunity, while we have the internet, while we have freedom still in our country, before any lights do go out, because some lights are going out. So there is a sense of urgency. Jesus felt it. He had 3 years to his ministry, didn't he? Mm-hmm. So he had to do these works, and he had to do them now while it was day, while we have the opportunity. Not put it off and wait for some more convenient time. That's a big thing for scientists. They wait for their more convenient time. Well, the more convenient time never comes. Who wanted to speak?
To say I want to be healed first before I do, I work for others. So while Jesus here, he is. He's being stoned, and yet
right.
Forget about that and take care of someone. I think the more we forget about, that's what that quote in the prose work says, too soon, right? We forget about our problems so much, so indulged in it, and do something. Sometimes you're healed before you know it.
Yes, I mean, here he was being stoned, but he could say, "Oh goodness, what's going on here? Wow, what's happening? Maybe I'm not demonstrating, or or I need to go and rest and look and see if I have any wounds, or who knows what kinds of things other people would succumb to." But the Christ, he just kept walking and moving and healing and doing. What an example, and he is to be our example to follow. So this work has to be done now. We have been given work to do now, not to do later, but now. If we fail to do it, well, you heard about it last week. I was on a roll last week. Well, that smiley letter got me going, I must admit. So, and we'll talk more about that tomorrow.
That brings up a good point, because people generally like to look for a sign to see if they're doing the right thing. Yeah. What happens if the sign is more disturbance and turmoil? It would be a good thing.
Thank you. Very, very much.
Chemicalization.
Yeah, right. The chemical is. I'm looking back in John 8, and Jesus had this basically an argument back and forth with these Pharisees and ultimated where they wanted to stone him. For what? He was just telling the truth, saying what was needed to be heard. So, and then he moved on and he had the poise. Wow, what an example. A poise to see this man that was sitting there, ready to be healed.
Thank you. And that we have a letter written by Kimball on poise on our website. The letter itself and Gary reading it on an Audible, and it's beautiful. Poise is such an important thing. Poise comes from God, and it is that unruffled spirit. And you know when you've met someone poised, they can't be thrown off. And why not? Why can't they be thrown off?
We have a good foundation, certainty in God.
Yeah. They are connected to the Father. They have that connection, and so God will give the answer. Jesus always knew how to answer these people. It's wonderful to read it with that outlook. And they were always trying to trip him up, and they couldn't do it because he was poised with his oneness with his Father. So let's all work for that more. You know, I'm grateful. I was thinking in many ways because Mrs. Evans, she loved to throw people off, didn't she? She would say things at times, and I would just, so often I would be so flabbergasted. I couldn't think of a thing. And then later, I wish I said this or I wish I said that. And I realize now it was training for this. It was, she was seeing if she could throw me off balance. And usually she could. So that showed something lacking, didn't it? It was tremendous.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
No, I think it helps to work more, to have that grounding, God with me all the time.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Florence wrote a wonderful response to this woman who wrote a letter to the Guardian bashing Christian Science. And Florence had beautiful words to answer it. True words that no one could argue with. It's the truth. Thank you for that, Florence.
Thank God.
Yes, thank God. We all must have that poise, that oneness with the Father. And if someone's trying to throw you off, you can't.
Consider it training.
Consider it training, yeah.
Thomas from New York a while ago talked about, not letting the wind blow you around this way and that. So I think of that once in a while.
Yeah, to be tossed to and fro. But it's true what Florence says. If you have to be grounded, you have to know your facts. When Satan tried to get to Jesus, he said, "It is written." He knew his facts, and that's how you get grounded. That foundation. Yes, that's why we study the Bible in Science and Health. We know the answers, so we can't be confused and confounded. We're grounded in this truth, and we have the ready answer, as did Jesus, the Christ.
So in a way, would it be right to say that when Jesus said to his disciples, "I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day, the night cometh when no man can work," that he was basically saying something like, "It is God's will that I teach and show you now this, the truth, as long as I'm here with you, because I am the Christ. I'm the light of understanding," basically. And when I am gone, basically, when I'm not physically here anymore, if you don't learn this, you will not be able to heal the way I am healing. It was basically teaching them this. Would that be accurate?
That sounds accurate to me.
Sure.
Well, the way to take advantage of this tremendous work being done, to learn from it. My goodness, how much greater proof can what he was doing then? Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else on that one?
Yeah, I would like to share something from Miscellaneous Writings. On page 258, Mrs. Eddy writes, quote, "Our great ensample, Jesus of Nazareth, met and abolished this unrelenting false claim of matter with the righteous scorn and power of spirit. When through mind he restored sight to the blind, he figuratively and literally spat upon matter, and anointing the wounded spirit with the great truth that God is all, he demonstrated the healing power and supremacy of the law of life and love," end quote. And I just really grateful for this class because it made me even appreciate this more, because this was his response by showing how to heal it. And he showed his scorn for the laws of matter and showed the way out of the belief. So thank you.
Thank you, yes.
Good.
And I love Mrs. Eddy quote about that we heal by teaching and teach by healing. They're interlocked. And I truly feel that's what is done in this church. It's a combination of it. To heal by teaching and teach by healing, which is what the Christ did. And it is what Mrs. Eddy did.
There's another nice quote that I came across from Miscellaneous Writings, page 170, where Mrs. Eddy says, "Spitting was the Hebrew method of expressing the utmost contempt. So Jesus is recorded as having expressed contempt for the material belief of material physical eyes as having any power to see," unquote.
That's great. Thank you. That's really good. Thank you very much. Because it's, others interpret that differently. In fact, thinking even that spit had some kind of healing powers to it. So Mrs. Eddy sets that straight, and it makes perfect sense. Thank you.
So what I find fascinating is that he actually, it was believed at that time that saliva would heal blindness, and maybe it had been tried 1,000,000 times on this poor individual. And I think that by doing it the way Jesus did it, he showed that it wasn't just saliva that did the job. It was really what the power of God behind everything that does the job.
Yeah, and here Mrs. Eddy's saying he's showing contempt for the material way of doing anything. So, anybody else?
Yes, and then in verse 7, where it says, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," and basically he went, washed, and came seeing. It just came to me that here he's washing in the pool of Siloam. That means water, and basically truth is the water that cleans the errors, the lies that cloud or distort our vision. So I find this to be very symbolic. Basically, he was told to wash his eyes, and symbolically it's saying, take in the truth that I'm presenting to you as the perfection that you already are.
Yes.
Yeah.
Healing waters of truth. I also read that the water for the pool of Siloam came through Hezekiah's tunnel, a remarkable engineering feat built in Old Testament times. It was called Siloam, which it was said meant sent, because the water in it had been sent through the conduit into the city. So all things are working together for good in God's creation, and everything that's needed is always present when the need is there, when you're knowing this truth.
According to
Go ahead, Mike.
According to Matthew Henry, the water came from Mount Zion also.
Okay, Mount Zion. Who else wanted to speak?
Well, also it's like Naaman was told to go and wash in Jordan, I mean, it shows a receptivity and an obedience to the Christ, that enabled this blind man to be healed.
Very much. That's a very important point. Yep. The humility. He didn't, did he? He did just met him, and he very humbly went and did what he was requested to do. Important point.
To go along with that, I read that Jesus didn't say, "You will see." And this dear man knew something. He felt it, and he obeyed and went and did what Jesus said.
Yes.
I was reading in Clear and Correct Teaching, Eustace defines obedience as man and obedience being synonymous. And I find that interesting as well, because here in this verse, the man was being obedient to the Christly instruction, which is why his true being, basically, which is why he was healed, because he was being obedient to God's will. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. That's absolutely right.
Well, it's a very important point, because what is man? What is the truth about each one of us?
The image and likeness of God.
Yeah. And if we are the image and likeness of God, how can we be other than obedient to that source that we are the image and likeness of? If we don't see ourselves as totally obedient to that source, then we're kidding ourselves. We're thinking that we are something that we are not.
And that's why it's so important to declare this daily for yourself, to know that God is your mind. God is the only pure and perfect mind. And to be knowing this, and that, yes, you're declaring your obedience to him. And what does Jesus say about the sheep? The sheep hear my voice and they follow. And I will hear no other voices. I will heed no other call, the hymn says. So it's a very beautiful point. Thank you. Our obedience to the Father. We're not rebellious. We're not trying to, do the opposite. And we need to know this for our children, to declare their obedience to the Father. They're obedient to what, does Mrs. Eddy say?
The mind that made them.
Yeah. Obedient to the mind that made them. We're all obedient to the mind that made us. It's a natural impulse to do this, but it needs to be developed and sought after and cherished. And then it increases. Thank you, Candy. Anyone else?
Okay, moving right along.
Question number 3. What does the neighbor's reaction to the blind man's healing say about the neighbors?
What did they say?
Well, one thing, they couldn't believe it was the same man.
Yep. Yes.
They doubted it was somebody else. It wasn't the one that was born blind. It had to be somebody else.
Right. Because it couldn't be true.
Yeah.
That he could now see.
Exactly.
Impossible.
Also, when, this is in a way sort of a being born again, isn't it? And when a person is truly born again and born losing that base of materiality, they are almost unrecognizable. Is Luann here? Yes. Luann, didn't you find that with your family?
Yes.
I can hardly hear you. There's something going on with the phone. But there's a lot of things, a lot of changes that were made in me, but they still think that, that it can't be possible, or you're still having struggles, and we're still going to treat you the same way, like we're going to patronize you, and all this stuff. All the way, poor Luann, she's always hurting, she's always suffering. And it's not the truth about me. It's not the truth about me anymore. I was healed of all that stuff. And I live my life here very contented, and I have a harmonious life here, but they don't ever see that. They always see the struggle that I used to have, and I don't have that anymore.
Thank you. And that's an important point. When you have had this born-again experience, you're feeling that Christ has changed you. What do you have to be careful about? Luann just said it.
The people don't hold that vision they had before and the thoughts they had before.
Thank you very much. That's exactly right. When you go into these, they say you never can go home, but you go back to past people that knew you in the past, they're going to view you in that way, and you must be alert to that and defend your Christ consciousness. That's why I loved, and I've given a testimony about it, an article about it, where Kimball says you have to carry this sign that says in your thinking, this place has changed hands, okay? This place has changed hands. God is dwelling in me, and you remember that, and you keep that sign posted in your thought, that they can't drag you back to what they thought you once were. Question that you had the healing at all. How could it be possible?
And you have to be prepared to not spend so much time with those who will try to drag you back. And God will provide you with new friends who will support you instead of drag you down. So be prepared to make some changes in how who you spend your time with.
Yeah, that's part of the growth.
But honestly, be delighted that you get to make the change.
Exactly.
It's not an onerous thing, for
sure. Jeremy has no desire to go back to anything.
Those people didn't help you out of it, so.
Yeah, obviously not. Yeah. So a lot of good lessons in this story. It's not a story in this healing.
That's a good point. Spend time with people who will also be delighted with you about the improvement and changes in your life.
Yeah, because what does Mrs. Eddy say in Science and Health? She says people will be jealous of you, but they will also
respect you.
Respect you. They will respect you. Maybe they never did before because you never spoke up to them, or you never had this air of authority and peace and confidence before you found the Christ. So it's like, wow, who is this? Or who is this that I can't boss around anymore?
Yeah, don't mess with me.
Don't mess with this. This place has changed hands.
Not under your control.
Yep, not under your control. I'm under God's control. And it's a wondrous thing when that happens. And it's not a human thing. You can't humanly do it. It's divine. It's the expression of your individual Christ. So yeah, they got it wrong, didn't they, the neighbors?
It also gave him strength and courage to speak out as to what happened to him and who did it, because of what he was owning up to and standing for and declaring what had happened. He was excommunicated, but he didn't care. He had to say what really happened and stand up for the person who, Jesus, who did this. And he wasn't going to. His bravery, very brave to say what he said.
Yes. Yeah, it you could tell the change in him, but he was, I'm sure, just so wondered. So, what's the word? grateful, I guess, is that he had been healed, that he would stand up for the Christ without any trouble at all.
It was also interesting that he used very few words, but he simply spoke the truth. You know, this is the honest truth of what happened, and just brief and to the point. And yet it was so powerfully stated.
I think there's a certain level of confidence that comes when one is that grateful for what happens.
Yes.
Gratitude is riches.
Yes.
Yeah.
Complaint is poverty.
And riches coming in many different ways. And one of them is your sure connection with your Father.
What I also found interesting in the reaction of the neighbors is that all of them expressed curiosity. And I don't know, it seemed to me that some of them were asking maybe because they wanted to learn the truth, but others were asking because they wanted to be physically healed of whatever material suffering they had, which is sort of the reaction that we get nowadays also from people in general. Some of them are open suddenly to learning more, where others are just selfish and they want to know more, but just because they want their material suffering to be relieved. So this kind of mirrors it. And also the intention behind bringing the man to the Pharisees. Some of them probably, and I read this in Matthew Henry, some of them may have had a good intent to show the Pharisees that Jesus was not who they thought he was, but others with a bad intent to accuse Jesus. So I found that interesting, that the reaction of people can be on either side, on the side of belief or on the side of truth.
Very true.
But within each one of us, there is a curiosity for what is true, isn't there? And they did want to know, where is this guy that did this? Because they sensed that there was something very special. Whether they wanted to learn positively about it or whether they were threatened by it, we don't know. But they did want to know, who is it? Who is this guy? Where is he?
Yeah, it's probably a combination.
They were alternately transported and alarmed.
Right.
And I love what the blind man said. Do you want to be one of his disciples?
Yeah.
Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. Checking their motive. It always goes back to motive.
Right. Yeah, that's question number 4, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, question number 4. What did the Pharisees' dealings with the formerly blind man say about their state of mind?
I mean, to me, they were just so filled with belief and human passion and prejudice and ill humor and basically little to no reason at all.
They were confused, weren't they?
Yeah, and defending error all the time, essentially. That's what they were doing.
And they were also threatened.
Yeah. This healing challenged their sense of authority. They thought they were the ones in charge.
And then they're picking over that he did it on the Sabbath. I mean,
the law.
Well, they were so steeped in the human, they were confused because human thinking cannot understand anything about God.
Stuck in stupid, as Elsie says.
Oh, I like it. It's true. Stuck in stupid.
And that's a carnal mind, and it's an enmity with God, and you see often where the Christ went, instead of bringing harmony and peace, it did bring division, didn't it? So don't be surprised by that, because everybody thinks, oh, it's supposed to be so harmonious. No, not necessarily.
error's destruction is not a harmonious experience.
No, but it has to be done, and it will lead to harmony. But perhaps not at first. It's going to take some little disruption and division and arguing and people carrying on. Because it is the carnal mind fighting for itself, or the carnal mind can't understand it. It is stuck and stupid. It doesn't understand it. So it's always saying, I mean, it's so stupid to be thinking about, oh, it's a Sabbath day.
Well, and in their fear of the truth, they attack the messenger.
Is that also what Mrs. Eddy means when she speaks of chemicalization of thought, that basically externally we're seeing that happening? Is that what she means?
No, that's
it is. It is chemicalization. It's fighting, the era fighting for its life.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it will happen when truth is spoken. And it happens sometimes with practitioners working with patients where they chemicalize over what is being said. But that leads to, Mrs. Eddy, it's a good thing if you can not jump off deck, but let it ferment and let it foam, and the air is coming to the surface to be healed and then destroyed ultimately.
She said you should not fear it.
No, you shouldn't fear it.
She says somewhere about a mighty detonation.
Uh-huh.
A big explosion.
Mm-hmm.
That clears the decks.
Yes.
And of course, have we ever seen anything like this today?
All over the world, no?
Yes, it's exactly what's going on. All of this stuff, wars and rumors of wars and storms and other things, it's all coming out, foaming. The era is being exposed to be destroyed. And God isn't doing it. It is destroying itself. And that's all it can do. And in thinking about it and in reading about history, it's gone on forever, hasn't it? It's the same thing. It's what this present generation is going to do about it. Hopefully we have grown, and certainly in many ways we have, and certainly with the coming of first the Christ and then science and health, we have so much more to take care of it, to deal with it. And so too much is given, what?
Much is required.
Yeah.
Yes. To whom much is given, much is required. Thank you.
Freely you have received, freely give.
Yes. And I read, and this, I forget where it was, but they said the consequences of us not doing what we should now is far more greater than those who had never heard of Christ Jesus, those who never heard of Mrs. Eddy and Christian Science. It's got it. This work has to be done in the light, in the day, just as Jesus. We were sent to do it, and we must feel this urgency.
It's up to us to prevent that another 1900 years of darkness.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. So let me know. Raise your hand if you have something else more important to do. Please stand up and let me let me address your thought. I'd like to hear what's so pressing that you have to do. There is nothing, my friends, nothing. So that we should be clear on. Okay, we have one last question and a few minutes to go.
Okay, number 5. How did Jesus care for the man when he found out the Pharisees cast him out?
It's interesting because casting out was excommunication. And I was reading of excommunication, this is the ancient Jewish world, There were 3 degrees. The first lasted for 30 days, then followed a second admonition, and if impenitent, the culprit was punished for 30 days more, and if still impenitent, he was laid under the cherem or ban, which was of indefinite duration and which entirely cut him off from intercourse with others. He was treated as if he were a leper. Now, I'm just saying that, and then it goes on. In modern Western world, the idea of excommunication means little because you can simply go to another church. But more recently, I've heard of people who have found our church, been so excited, and gone back to their branch church, and guess what?
They don't want to hear it.
Reviled.
Yes. Oh, don't go there. Oh, my goodness. They were excommunicated. They're not following Mrs. Eddie's science. So I thought, well, gosh, how many years has it been? But we're still,
You're ready to lose some friends, too.
Yes. Yeah. And have any of these people visited us? No, none of them have seen us. Probably they've never even seen our website.
They're probably afraid to click on it.
Well, they are because
they are superstitious.
Years ago, letters were sent out when we were excommunicated that we were renegades, and so. But as we've said, it's the greatest thing that's ever happened to us, and only blessings have come of it, and our eyes have been opened. But I just bring that up because I thought, goodness, all these years and it's still going on. And I thought, and these, this man said some of these people in his church he had somewhat respected, but now it's caused him to question, perhaps, and which is always a good thing. And of course, you're all invited to come see us. And as I've said, I will answer any question anybody has about this church. And there are others here who would, I know, say the same thing. We have nothing ever to hide, but everything to share and to expose and to, well, it's just the pearl of great price.
Yes. So
the reality.
Go ahead.
The reality is that since the carnal mind is a lie to begin with, the only way it can protect itself is to create more lies. So the lies against Plainfield or anybody speaking the truth just get bigger. And unfortunately, too many people believe that.
Well, thank you. And it's true. And we just keep on shining the light and declaring the truth. And the truth has to be, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And this truth has to be exposed. And
there are some who are willing to see.
I'd like to add what you said was that the Plainfield Church is not afraid. I mean, if you go to other CS churches, they always have to check to see if it's something that's authorized or okay. And we don't have to do that. We're not afraid.
That's very true. Thank you. It's very liberating not to be afraid.
Oh, yes.
Yes. And the books we have are approved by God, and they're authorized by God, and that's all that matters. And you can judge for yourself whether they're healing and helpful or not. Don't take my word or our word for it. And that's our biggest. Think independently, think freely with God, without ecclesiastical despotism and wickedness in high places.
That's basically what John 9 tells us. I mean, what Plainfield has experienced. Because the man was healed, and after being healed, he spoke openly, bravely, and boldly for the truth. And then he was excommunicated. And then the Christ, basically represented by Jesus, comforted him. And that's basically what Plainfield has done and is doing.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And how did Jesus care for the man? He asked him a question.
He asked him whether he believed in the Son of God, I think it was.
Yeah. He asked him if he learned anything. Now that he was free from that ecclesiastical despotism, he asked him if he learned anything. That's what the word means that was translated into believe. Now that you're free, are you going to learn what it is that healed you?
Thank you. That's a huge important. That is so important.
Because that's what happened to the Plainfield Church. Yeah. We got excommunicated and we said, whoa, this is something new and different. Yeah. And we went on. It turned out to be the greatest blessing that could ever have happened to us. Mm-hmm. Through that experience, we learned more than we could ever have learned had we not gone through that experience. Infinitely more. So here was this blind man, no longer blind, with an opportunity to learn the truth. Can you imagine what an opportunity that is?
It's interesting because those three phases of excommunication you read reminded me of, like, a lot of corporate environments have three things, like, verbal warning, written warning, and then you're fired.
All right.
Like, lost his first job and now he has a new one. So, and I quite like that analogy. So,
and when Mrs. Eddy was healed that day in February, what did she do? She determined she was going to find out what healed her, and she wrote Science and Health. Now,
she says she spent 3 years aloof from society, reading the scriptures.
Yes.
And was sweet and buoyant with hope.
Yes.
3 years of sweet buoyancy, studying the scriptures.
Now, these instantaneous healings where people get healed, what often happens?
You say, whew, that's gone, and just move on.
Yeah.
Do.
Exactly.
They go back to their vomit.
Yeah.
As Mrs. Eddy says.
And the cause of science grows none with that sort of thing. And then people just seek it for the loaves and fishes. But when you get healed to a great degree or a lesser degree, and you want to know what healed you, and you study and you embrace this science, wondrous things happen. And it is a requirement. It is a requirement to have this. I thought this was rather interesting. Someone wrote that how this kind of relates to us, this story. Well, first, that we are all spiritually blind. We maybe start out that way, although little children I don't feel are. But then Jesus takes the initiative in healing us from the blindness with the truth. Jesus does a work of creation in us, not reformation. And you see, being born again is creation, right? It's creation. In this work, we must be obedient. We talked about that to Jesus' commands. Drop everything and follow him, the obedience. He commands us to be washed in the water of baptism. And that is explained in Mrs. Eddy's chapter, Pond and Purpose. Then we become a mystery to our former associates, not even seeming to be the same person. Then we display a loyalty to Jesus when we are persecuted, boldly and plainly testifying of his work in our lives and confounding others. We pass from little knowledge to greater knowledge, and this brings us to a greater worship and adoration. We never know the name of this man who was born blind. Jesus is the important one. A true disciple is content to remain anonymous if his Lord gets the glory. So these are all important lessons from this beautiful healing of the Christ and the blind man. So we thank you so much, Betty, for taking initiative and moderating it today. Anyone else have anything to add before we close?
Yes. just what you just read made me think it's great to be excommunicated from being stuck in stupid.
That is absolutely correct.
Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Betty.
Thank you.
Thank you.